Darklings! So, several months ago I did a 90s vampire movie list, which seemed to be fairly well received, even though a lot of people started suggesting movies from other decades because they ignored the fact that I said 90s. Anyway, today's list is 80s vampires. I haven't seen all of these, but pretty close, and I can only showcase the ones that I do in fact have. So to start, my favorite, The Lost Boys. If you haven't seen this movie yet, you must. It's sort of required in order to be of a vaguely spooky type, likes horror comedy. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a big cult favorite for good reason. It's funny, the first time I watched it when I rented it from Blockbuster as a teenager, I really didn't like it. I thought it was kind of stupid. But then I found myself wanting to watch it again and again and again and again. Now I really love it. Another one I was not sure how I felt about it the first time I saw it, but I do really adore it now, is Fright Night. I ended up watching the 2.5 hour long documentary, You're So Cool, Brewster, which was about the filming of Fright Night and did have a little bit of passing mention of Fright Night 2 and the remake. This is another horror comedy that's very much worth watching, and it came out around the same time as Lost Boys, 2 years earlier in '85. This was one that it took me several watches to actually remember what even happened, but it does have a very similar plot line to The Lost Boys, which is Near Dark, except instead of California punk rockers, it's like Hicks in Oklahoma, but it has a lot of the similar story structure. Another one, horror comedies. Again, apparently 80s vampires are mostly funny, with a very young Jim Carrey is Once Bitten, and this one's very fun. I have the soundtrack on my iPod. You can't take it very seriously. It's got a little bit of some of that questionable 80s humor with the light sexism, but this is definitely a funny one. I get a kick out of this one, Vamp, with Grace Jones with the Keith Haring painted look, where a couple of guys go out to a strip club in the super seedy part of town. There's some pretty awesome, crazy gore effects. Again, there's also a heavy dose of camp and comedy. And it's kind of a cheese fest, and I appreciate it. This one's slightly less well known than the others, but I get a big kick out of it. It's very silly. But Robert Sean Leonard, pre Dead Poet Society, and My Best Friend is a Vampire it's something else. You really can't take it very seriously, but I do think it's quite entertaining. Now this one is super art house, and unlike the others, isn't very funny at all. But this is Tony Scott's first feature film before Top Gun, featuring my dear David Bowie, Susan Sarandon, and Catherine Deneuve. This is actually, I don't know if you can see it, but the Bowie tattoo I have is from the opening scene of this film. Even if you choose to not watch the whole film, please watch at least the first 15 minutes if you are of the Gothic persuasion, because it features Bauhaus and a gay club in London called Heaven and lots of art house cinematography. It's totally worth it. It was actually my introduction to Bauhaus when I was 17. I was a little late to the game. The next one on here, and I hated this one even though I've met several people who very much enjoy it, is Vampire's Kiss with Jennifer Beals and Nicolas Cage, and I didn't like it. I thought it was dumb. His overacting is too much for me, and it was just a little too much. I couldn't really do it, but I figured I'd throw it out there. Again, Fright Night 2, this is not a perfect movie. The first one is much better, but this is still kind of an interesting follow-up that features multiple vampires instead of just the one. In this case, Charlie has gone on to college. Next one, which I haven't had the chance to see yet and do want to, is Return to Salem's Lot. I will talk about the original Salem's Lot in a different video. So I haven't seen that, so I can't really give very much info on it. Another one, Monster Squad. I've mentioned this in several videos, and Dracula. This is one of the better Dracula portrayals there is out there, so even if it's not exclusively a vampire film, Dracula is still a heavy hitter in the genre and cannot be ignored. Another one on here from Tobe Hooper, and I don't have it on DVD but did watch it semi-recently, is Lifeforce. And this is super weird because it's like alien soul-sucking vampires. It's kind of a trip, and I really wish that it hadn't been one of those chopped to pieces by Studio Interference films. But it is on Amazon Prime last I checked, and it was interesting. It's strange, but it was interesting. Another one, Vampire in Venice or Prince of Night, which is a sorta kinda sequel to 1979's Nosferatu with Klaus Kinski returning as Dracula. I have no idea how I feel about this one. It's a hot mess, really. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But if you want to investigate it, it's not that hard. Another one, this is from Ken Russell, so if you're familiar with his filmography, you know it's weird. All of his movies are weird. This is based off of one of Bram Stoker's lesser books, which is in turn based off of some other folklore of this region in England. And it's kind of a hot mess. It does feature a young Hugh Grant. It's not really I can't tell if she's supposed to be a vampire or just a snake goddess. Either way, there's a vampiric quality to her. It's a very strange little movie. I don't even know how I feel about it. Speaking of strange, this might be the weirdest one on the list. And I went through a lot of lengths to watch this. It's Czech, Upir Ziferatu, or the Farhat Vampire, which is a vampiric car. You'd think this would be better than it ended up being. I will save you the trouble of trying to hunt this down because this DVD does not have English subtitles. I had to watch them off of a separate device while watching this. That's the level of crazy I am. Definitely kind of a strange one. I really expected it to be a crazy vampiric car. Except it wasn't really that. It was mostly just this weird little professor dude running around trying to solve a mystery that didn't make any sense. And I don't know. I don't necessarily recommend that one. Another one out of the cycle of films that featured Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum when they were married is Transylvania 65000. I don't recommend it. I thought it was going to be at least the fun kind of cheesy. Instead, it was the awkward kind of cheesy. It was kind of playing up off of this like Abbott and Costello type of humor, except it didn't pan out. It was mostly just very awkward and sort of a waste of time. I was told it was bad and I didn't listen. Waxwork from 1988 isn't really a vampire film, but if you're familiar with the Waxwork films, kids go into a wax museum and get trapped in the dioramas, and there is in fact a vampire in one of them, so I figured I'd throw it on here. The last two on this list I haven't seen, but also figured I'd add, which would be Vampire Hunter D, which due to my not very much interest in anime, I have not watched, although I did see Bloodlust. And so I really can't form an opinion. What I have seen still-wise of the art, I think I'd probably have an aneurysm, so I've stayed away from it. And the other one is Dance of the Damned, which, from my understanding, is kind of a softcore porno type of weird exploitive film, and so I've kind of stayed away from that one because it didn't seem interesting. But anyway, those are some 80s vampires for you. Feel free to check out any of these titles. They'll be listed in the description. Till next time, Darklings.